Thank you. I am proud and excited to be here and to merit such a wonderful introduction. And I could just start by saying that when we were first establishing the practice of operational energy more than a decade ago in the Pentagon, that we were looking for a consortium like this with an OTA, with another transaction authority at the heart of it. And we just weren't able to make it happen. So I'm not surprised that it would take a Mike Wu to make it happen. And I'm excited to be here talking as we're watching this thing form and happen. And it's a great mechanism, especially for non-traditional performers. But what I'm really excited about today is to introduce our wonderful guests, talk about the right person being in the right place at the right time. Melanie Nakagawa is the Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Climate and Energy at the National Security Council. And this is no surprise if you've been following Melanie's career, which I hope you have been. She has been one of the leading voices for energy and environment in this government, in this town, in this country for some time. She's a lawyer, an international relations expert, an energy and environment expert from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to the State Department, where she was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy Transformation, and then working for a private capital company, helping to raise money for the private sector. So she knows these issues from every angle, and we're just so fortunate to have her in such an important role in the NSC. So Melanie, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Great, thank you. I'll permanently unmute myself.
Good, please, because we have a lot of questions for you. I'm going to start just with the biggest question that, high level, high altitude sort of question for you. And that is, can you just describe for us the Biden administration's overall view on energy and climate change as a national security issue, or really a national security imperative?
Sure, no, happy to. And what I'm really excited about, and since coming back to government, thank you so much, Mike, and others for inviting me here to speak to all of you. One of these days we can do one of these things in person because it's, so many Zoom boxes. But no, I'm really thrilled because one of the reasons what enticed me to come back and really attracted me to come back and come back into government service was the fact that this administration was tackling climate issues and energy issues in a very different way than it's ever really been done before. And it's done that in the sense that twofold. One, it's actually put climate and energy issues in the same room together in a much more holistic and meaningful approach than we've seen before. Meaning when we talk about our climate goals, which are ambitious, they are, to walk away from the UN climate conference at the end of this year happening in Glasgow, having kept intact this 1.5 degree limit to our global warming. And that target is something that we're really keen to focus on. How do you get governments and countries and private sector entities to all ensure that we are going to keep and limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius? So that's sort of an overall goal and a framework to get there. And then the other key piece was that involves our energy sector, right? In order to achieve that goal, it has to involve what is our incumbent energy, our baked in contracts, our future energy posture going to look like. And that has to be done in the same room. That conversation of what our energy posture needs to be and should be has to be done in the context of our climate goals and our commitments. But our climate goals and our ambition also has to be done in a way that takes into account the pragmatic realities of our energy systems as they are today, and make sure we're investing in the solutions and technologies that are going to get us to that future of where we want to see from a climate perspective. So that is the overall kind of top line, sort of the combination of the energy, climate, and the duality of that and bringing that together in one place. The other key piece is that it is a top foreign policy and national security priority, meaning what that means in practice, because it is sort of, campaign rhetoric or things that we wrote on transition together. But what it means, what I've learned it means in practice is that in every conversation that President Biden has with foreign leaders over the last 120 some odd days, and even frankly before he got sworn into the presidency, it means raising climate change and clean energy issues as part of that conversation. It means that there's not a single foreign leader who won't have a briefing book that must have climate and energy issues in it, because President Biden's going to ask you about it or want to talk to you about it. You better be conversant in that conversation. And it's not just a one-off. It's actually something that we then follow up with repeated conversations. We have the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change, John Kerry, who will follow up in those conversations and say, well, what can we do together? What can we do with other countries to further this goal around climate ambition and clean energy deployment? And then it follows up with people in the White House and everywhere it kind of cascades throughout the administration. So I'm happy to say that that strategy of these repeated conversations and building these habits of cooperation with foreign leaders and foreign countries based on a position of strength at home, where we are domestically on climate, has borne fruit. The president is on his first international trip this week, and we just had a great outcome out of the Group of Seven meeting, where we had, the entire Group of Seven countries committing to 1.5 degree aligned climate futures. We were just at the NATO summit. We could talk more about what happened at NATO, and they agreed to a climate security action plan. Our early bilateral meetings with Canada, Mexico, Japan, and South Korea all had climate featured as a key deliverable to those discussions. So it's one of those things where literally, our team is busy at work because pretty much all of our engagements are featuring climate or energy issues as a core deliverable or a key deliverable to those conversations. And so that's really what has changed, I think, from previous administrations to this one.
Well, as long as you brought it up, can you tell us a little bit about the NATO Climate Action Plan, what's in there and what we can expect to see out of that?
So what's exciting about that plan in particular is really the fact that, we all know that Stoltenberg is a great champion of trying to advance climate action as part of the NATO mission. And you also want to make sure, like we're doing here in the US, that these things are enduring, that it's not just because you have a key leader that's talking about this issue that it's on the agenda, but that it's something that's actually baked in and it's repeatable and it becomes habit forming. And so part of that action agenda that we're excited about from security action is that it is actually enforcing, or it's including in its action plan an assessment around climate risks and climate security as part of that. I think it's on an annual basis. I think you probably know this better than I do. And so part of that, why that's so important to us is that this is enduring. It's going to continue. It's now part of the way NATO thinks about ensuring its resilience. And it's, again, the idea of mainstreaming climate change and climate risks to our operations, to our installations. It's also looking at NATO's own physical installations and the climate opportunities there and the risks that they face, but also opportunities to invest in a clean energy aspect are really key to this. So that's what, I think it's a real sort of evolution of where we are as we think about climate as a security risk and what that means. And it's just another sort of manifestation of how we want to see that happen.
And the president has made clear from the very beginning that part of this vision is, as you said, what happens at home. And that means at home at the Department of Defense too. So could you talk to us a little bit about how this vision extends to, creating resilient infrastructure in the Department of Defense and secure energy and other ways to sort of protect the critical missions at the Department of Defense? Those things are on the table, right?
They are absolutely on the table. And part of the way we're rolling this out is you have both the US footprint, the DoD operations and installations, but you also have a government-wide aspect as well. So if you step back for a minute and you look at the American Jobs Plan and this massive investment into our economy and growth and jobs and building back better, it includes a variety of elements that do touch the military in a very meaningful way, and it touches DoD, whether it's the goal to build, modern, sustainable, resilient infrastructure. We have re-energizing the power sector, so the power systems that are powering our bases, both at home and overseas, but mostly for the American Jobs Plan, our domestic power infrastructure, ensuring that power sector is 100% carbon-free electricity by 2035. The other key piece that I think has a DoD strong nexus is around electric vehicle manufacturing and electric vehicle electrification, charging stations, and ensuring that we have 500,000 EV chargers by 2030 and replacing our diesel transit vehicles. I think it's about 50,000 of those. And then looking about thinking about the worker transition and ensuring that we have the workers through the American Jobs Plan to build this infrastructure and power that. So that's sort of the step back in terms of across the entire US economy and our US infrastructure, what we're looking to do. Across the DoD specific elements, Sharon, your former home, and in terms of what you're seeing in terms of how we're staffing that. I mean, again, it's sort of personnel is policy. That's, I think, that some people often say. And not only do you have the SecDef early on, I think it was March 4th in his message of force, he talked about 3 areas of the message to force: defend the nation, which included tackling climate crisis. He talked about taking care of our people. And then he also talked about succeeding through teamwork. And so even in that March 4th message to force, you see the Secretary of Defense setting a signal that he wants to see climate as a core part of what DoD is doing. And then as you play that out, it is about the type of energy they're using, the type of how they're building their buildings, the vehicles that are going to be on site, and it really kind of spreads throughout. But it regards to personnel. And so I think you're still in the early days of the administration. They're still staffing up the full suite of teams and people that'll be within DoD to execute this mission and this vision. But it's pretty clear already that they are looking at building out teams focused around sustainability, procurement issues, and kind of acquisition and technologies all around clean energy sustainability, but from a resilience perspective of the resilient force.
That's great. And I assume that we'll also see some research and development dollars in there as well.
Yes, so definitely. I mean, that's part of, as we know, the Marines have also been on the forefront of some of the cutting edge technologies that are out there. And so we're seeing I think the President's Committee is like a 4-fold increase in R&D, which includes part of that, the DoD component.
Okay. So you mentioned the American Jobs Plan. And of course, also the President recently announced the fiscal year 2022 budget request. Can you kind of put the pieces together, the pieces of the puzzle together for us on resources, legislation, funding streams that are going to come together? We've got the American Jobs Plan, infrastructure bill, the defense budget. Just give us a picture of how you see all of that coming together, where the main, legislation and money is going to come from.
So that is, we are still kind of in the midst of a congressional season,
right.
For August recess. So, again, as far as these, I focus obviously on the international budget mostly. And the way we're looking at it is we have the budget's out and it has a pretty massive investment in clean energy, both globally and it's, massive definitely internationally. It's a 3-fold increase in adaptation resources globally and a doubling of our international climate budget. But on the domestic front, it has, again, similarly, significant investments in R&D at our Department of Energy, also around sort of our federal buildings and federal acquisitions component as well, investments there. So you have that vehicle. You also have the jobs package, which is a series of bills and legislative efforts. And then you also have other legislative efforts that might kind of fold into this process as we get closer to the end of the year. So I think you've got several streams coming together. I can't sort of read the tea leaves yet of exactly how those are all going to come forward. But I do know that our team is working really hard to ensure that we get that off the ground and passed as quickly as possible.
That's great. And I think there will be a lot of opportunity in there. And maybe you can expand on that a little bit about how the administration and how you see partnerships between the government and the private sector around innovation playing a part.
I think that this is a really key area, and this is where I think the consortium is a great idea to kind of help bolster this effort, which is now you have a lot of people like myself and others that are coming back into government who have spent some time outside of government and are really keen to figure out what are the public sector tools that can actually be used to mobilize private sector innovation, private sector deployment, commercialization, even the R&D side, identifying where the gaps are that we need more innovation power behind it to actually get us to what we need by 2030 or 2040, whatever the time frame is in terms of that technology commercialization deployment pathway. And one thing that's going to be key is that we need more. Well, one is a consistent voice from the private sector entities of where the gaps are that they need filled by government policy signals. I think you've got a team here that very much understands that we are trying to send certain signals to the market to get it to move towards greater innovation in vehicles, power, built environment materials. And we want to make sure we're translating that to the private sector, and the private sector is actually hearing the messages we're trying to send with the policy signals we're sending. So whether it's targets on fuel, targets on carbon content, targets on these net zero commitments that various entities in the private sector are making, how does that translate to what we're trying to do with our government policy signals? That I think is a really key part of this. And so really would welcome ideas from this consortium in terms of where are those gaps, where that policy signal will be so important, and be able to kind of accelerate your effort. because we are starting to do that already to date with working with stakeholders and having these conversations, a lot of off the record conversations with groups like yours and others that are listening in today about what are those areas where you want to see the US be able to identify where we want to build our own federal acquisition goals and where we want to help other countries do that as well. There's a greening government partnership we've started with other countries where we're talking about with them what we're doing at home on our federal procurement and encouraging and working with other countries on best practice of what they can be doing in their governments. So for any companies that are here that are multinational, it's a great opportunity to take advantage of the US who's going to be advocating and talking about our own initiatives at home with partners around the world. And if you happen to have that's a market you want to enter into or a market that you already are in, and you want to accelerate your deployment, I think this is a great opportunity to have us showcase how we're using it working with you today and how you can be working with these other countries tomorrow.
It'd be really interesting if you could expand a little bit on your own personal perspective on that issue, because it probably feels like a million years ago, but before you were doing this, you were, I think it's Princeville Capital, is that right? You were trying to help figure out how to move money for energy innovation. So, I mean, could you talk a little bit about that and how it might have shaped your perception and what you think needs to happen in order to push that innovation and accelerate that kind of innovation?
Sure. I mean, part of my old job was working with growth stage businesses who were trying to accelerate their technology adoption in other countries. And it was about trying to figure out which policy signals were being sent by those countries to create the market pathway for these companies to deploy into. I think that what I'm excited about now is now that I have this perspective of what are some of those policy signals we can be setting. Is it, phasing out of, carbon and, certain types of fuel cycles? Is it different types of building material requirements for our built environment? And then identifying which technologies would actually benefit from those and seeing how those could accelerate is part of what we're thinking through now. Because again, this is about what kind of businesses that are around the table today have new markets that should be opening up for them that aren't yet. And how can governments help open up those markets? For many of us, there's us in Europe need to be working together, but frankly, there's lots of places outside of the Northern Hemisphere that could really benefit from these technologies. So the companies I worked with in the past, it was great to be able to showcase to them that they were small businesses at times who didn't have a government relations shop and couldn't figure out where to plug into in the federal government to learn more about what are the public sector tools or resources or dollars that they can get to actually grow their opportunity or business, or the diplomatic tools, which countries could they be working with, and how can State Department or USAID or the White House help them showcase their technology or their innovation to another country or another market. And to be able to kind of serve that kind of Sherpa function and be able to say to the various companies or businesses, here, if you're doing this well here, how can we, explore new markets? Where are the commercial advocacy opportunities for your business to take that overseas, so that we see decarbonization in many of these sectors in other countries. So thinking that through, but really helping to serve that translation function of identifying where in the government should you be knocking on that door? What tools did the government have that could help you move your business faster? How can government procurement help your business grow? I think those things are still gaps that need to be filled. And that's what I was, part of the role that I served in my last job was to help serve some of that Sherpa function and identify where those gaps are, where those signals are that we should be kind of flowing in behind.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think that's exactly the role that a consortium like this can play, because, right now you kind of have to have a big, contracting shop. And, I don't mean to be critical of the original equipment companies and manufacturers and the big defense contractors, because they're, of course, really, really necessary for building a modern military. However, when we're talking about energy, we need sort of, unusual performers and not the usual suspects to come in with the innovation. And I think we see that across the board at DoD, whether it's unmanned systems or vehicles or fuels, hydrogen. There's a whole range of possibilities there, and they're not the usual performers for the Department of Defense. So it feels like a consortium like this is a way to bring in those non-traditional performers. And that feels very much like it's part of the Biden agenda as well, is to try to bring in non-traditional performers, open up the opportunity, so I mean, it feels to me like this is very compatible with what you're trying to do. And I said the president's been very clear that the federal government has a really important role to play.
It's also about finding that pipeline, right? So I think some of the larger players know how to work in a federal government machinery. And frankly, when it comes to the clean energy economy and the sustainability economy, it's still evolving and some of it's relatively new. And so how do we make sure that those voices and those companies are showing up at the door, because they don't necessarily have the existing relationships or have the existing, contracts in place, that they're a known entity. And so it is how do we make sure that we're reaching out and meeting and hearing from all those really innovative companies that are serving the clean energy ecosystem and the energy efficiency ecosystem for us. And so that's a key question that I want to make sure we're building, building this broader coalition and this broader community of entities that we're working with that are building a more resilient, frankly, a more resilient military and a more resilient economy here at home. And again, we can help then translate that or bring that on the road with us overseas.
And really, how do we move fast enough? Y'all are moving pretty fast, but to make this transition work, we have to move fast. And speaking of moving fast, we're just a few minutes left. Anything you can give us a heads up about? Anything coming up that you can hint or preview for us? Any new moves in the administration in this space?
So I think in terms of the resilience side of things. So these are a few. One is, like I said, I'm really excited. We've got this national intelligence estimate. One of the things I've learned is where our intel agencies can flag what are critical climate risks or climate opportunities is really important. And so we have a national intelligence estimate coming out later this year that'll help our intel agencies and our diplomacy arms understand where the risks are and the hotspots so that we can be actually better forward deployed and addressing some of those risks that are out there on climate. Another interesting thing that's coming around the corner is we just finished this Group of 7 meeting in Europe the president was on, and it was really about, I guess, two things. One was the kind of global commitments to 1.5 degrees Celsius around mobilizing finance. And we're really kind of trying to carry that momentum into the fall when we've got the Group of 20 meeting later on this year. And so really thinking through how are we getting key large country actors to take pretty ambitious climate action that will seep throughout their entire sort of economic ecosystem. So it's going to have to affect their power sector, their transportation sector. And what we're now thinking through sectorally is how do we help these countries achieve these ambitious targets? So what technologies, what policies, what regulations do each of these countries actually need to have passed or will be passing so that they can hit these targets? And so this is one where we'd love to be able to showcase what the U.S. industry is able to do and U.S. companies are able to do to help these countries meet their targets, because they have the solution or they have the decarbonized alternative that can make these targets much more realistic for them. And so we're really kind of, once the president's back, we are really sort of hard at work at thinking through these next few meetings coming up this fall, and specifically where those opportunities are for the U.S. government to help drive a sectoral approach around some of these big wins.
And that, of course, will lead you right up to COP26 too, which is in November, right?
That's correct.
And the G20 meeting's right before it, right? It's like
G20 is actually end of October. So the leaders will go from probably the G20 right to the start of the climate conference. But really the fall calendar starts with the UN General Assembly in New York. And then it goes right into the Group of 20 countries and then the climate conference later this year. And really, we want to see a massive tailwind for us to carry our work program forward into next year, which will really be about how do you implement these targets.
That is an admirable body of work, and we're excited to hear about it, Melanie, and wish you all the best in the work that you're doing. I think you'll see at the Department of Defense that it's not just about hitting these marks and these goals, but it's also about making a better military that's better positioned and postured for the time that we're in all kinds of ways that we're going to hear about all throughout this day. So we appreciate the work you're doing and wish you all the best. Good luck.
No, please. And I hope that I can hear from all of you in some more interactive fashion. I'm actually not allowed to chat in the chat box because then it has to be recorded for government record keeping. So I'm seeing the questions come through, but I'm unfortunately not allowed to respond. But so please reach out to Mike or Sharon And would love to hear from you, and we can set up some follow-up conversations so we can actually go into the topics that you are all interested in. Hope that was a good teaser.